I want to welcome into the studio an experienced coach who was active, for those, depends what generation you are listening to the show tonight, on the professional tour back in the 80s. Now, I have to get this out because I always get asked about the surname. So, yes, a relative of basketballer Matthew Dellavedova is a first cousin of Matthew's father, also is a son, Matthew, who's a professional tennis player, 22 years of age, who's had his best year on tour, approaching 50 match wins. He's cut his ranking from about 1,500 odd down inside the top 600, a couple of finals, and we're hoping Matt, maybe third time lucky, can win his first ITF singles title. He's a TA qualified registered advanced coach. He's the head coach at Wonga Park Tennis Club, beautiful part of Melbourne, out in the east since the 90s. Peter Dellavedova, we've had a few off-air conversations. In fact, with Pete, we had you on the show on the phone probably a couple of years ago. It was great to have you in the studio.
Yeah, thank you very much for the invite, Brett. And we have spoke a couple of times, and it is nice to get into the studio and get a chance to have a chat.
There's a bit to cover, and we're always scratching for time, but just to paint that picture of your son, because we talk about all levels of the tour, the ITF, the grounding tour, the entry to get started in this sport. And Matt has spent the large chunk of this year, Pete, overseas. That comes at a cost.
Yeah, it does, Brett. He'd left Australia just after the Futures here in Bendigo, and he's pretty much been overseas playing every single week since the end of April. And I got a chance to go overseas and see him for a couple of weeks this year. And then he's, at the moment, he's playing in Greece. And look, we had a discussion a couple of weeks ago about when he was coming back. He was really desperate to get back for the challenges in Playford. But unfortunately, when we're making that decision, the airfares, the return airfares become insane to be able to get back to Australia. So we had to make the difficult decision to basically stay there, and he'll stay on the tour and try to improve his ranking as much as possible. So
Pete, the big talking point in tennis, the common consensus is unless you are in that top 100, or maybe even let's say round about the 100 mark, it's tough to make it in this sport. It's tough to get ahead of the ledger, ahead of break even. You're effectively your own business, taking a risk, going on the road. You got your expenditure, you got your income. We know down to that ITF level, unless you're winning ITF after ITF after ITF, you're losing matches, but you're also losing in your hip pocket. I don't know how much you're prepared to share tonight, but just to give our listeners some understanding of what it takes for your son to actually be on the road.
Well, Brett, it's a tough one because when the kids grow up, they dream of being professional tennis players, and you want to allow them to chase their dreams. When Matt picked up his first point as a 16-year-old, he sort of thought, okay, off we go. It's difficult because there's 3 tiers of professional tennis, and pretty much from best in the world to 100, you're playing the ATP Tour. From 100 to about 250, you're playing the Challenger Tour, and you can make some money in that. And you really don't break even in playing professional tennis until you're around about the 330. That means that if you're anything outside 330 in the world, your parents or sponsors are looking at it, and so pretty much it's by the parents. So it's when you think of the number, like there's from, say for example, from 250 in the world to about 2,600 that have got ATP points just in the men. And to make that top 330 before you even make a cent, it's a grind. So there's no doubt at all. They all work very hard. I'm always in awe of how resilient they are. I know so many players in Australia that have just hung in their dream, and while they're playing this ITF, just desperate to be able to get out of the ITF and into the Challenger Tour. But it is tough. It is very, very tough. And unfortunately, you have to spend a long time away. And unlike other countries where you might be able to pop home after every couple of weeks and maybe go and see a coach and see family, we can't top that because we're too far.
We'll get into that a little bit further. Alongside you tonight is Brian Hamill, the father of an aspiring tennis player, Zach, who I've seen hit, courtesy of Brian sending me some great footage out there at Wonga Park with yourself, Pete. To share his experiences as a father, as a spectator. Brian and I have had some dialogue over the last month. Brian's also had some dialogue with Tennis Australia and some of the key people there, but really appreciate you coming in, Brian. I know you're very passionate about the sport and very passionate as any father would be about their son and what he's trying to aspire to be.
Thanks, Brett. Nice. Thanks for having me on.
Great to have you here. I mean, there's a little bit to unpack, and I think all the information you sent me pre-show, I'd love to try and get through that as succinctly as we can, but to get some strong messages across tonight. But you've come in, I suppose, as a parent, not a history in tennis, coaching and playing and all that sort of. You're an observer. You're a businessman. You manage your own business, so you're seeing it from a few different lenses. But take us through, Zach, coming into a tennis club. You're a parent. You're observing. I think your wife, as you mentioned, is heavily involved in the organisation of the tournaments and Saturday. What have been your observations of junior tennis and
junior tennis? Well, when I was a kid, I used to really love junior tennis. I played it as a kid, and there used to be a lot of social events, and I found people in the club, they used to all get along. Everyone used to, know their place. Whereas I find clubs these days, parents are taking over, and they're having too much say. They believe they're more entitled to what they are. Like, these people that are running clubs are volunteers, whereas parents, they come on to the court and they tell Pete what he should be doing wrong. What he's doing wrong. They tell, my wife what she's doing wrong. And I think they just need to back up and just relax and let kids play tennis. And at the end of the day, it's junior tennis. When they're not going to be here to, break any records. They're here to just have fun. But they've got their parents, peering over the fence because, they don't want to put too much pressure on the kid. And it's just, I find tennis clubs these days are not as fun as they used to be. And I think it's mainly because clubs have to deal with parents rather than just dealing with being a club. So clubs should be able to enjoy social events, club championships, discos, all that kind of social thing, whereas they're all tied up worrying about who they're offending, who they're trying to stick up for, and I just think parents should just back up a little bit.
So, Pete, when you hear that as a person that's been coaching for, 30, 40 years and having played...
Pete needs a statue. He really does. I honestly don't know how he does it.
So you've seen the evolvement over a long period, just the vibe of a tennis club. When you hear that, what do you think?
It's so true. I think the business of tennis is doing really well. Business, that means us coaches out there that run businesses. The Tennis Australia as a business is doing really well. But like Brian said, I do believe that there has been a real shift away from people actually enjoying and just playing tennis for the love of it. There are a lot less people now that just go down to the club and want to have a hit. More people want to sort of organise a lesson and are more interested, and parents are more interested in how many lessons someone else is having rather than just the love of the game. So I have noticed that. I've noticed that, I was lucky enough to be involved in the Australian Open a couple of times at Kooyong, and my parents... I remember they said, "Oh, listen, good luck. Let us know how you go." And they were busy on the farm, and they didn't even. It was something that was just. It was your own journey, and now, of course, the parents are a lot more involved, and some of it's healthy, and some of it's not so healthy, and that's what I've noticed. That's what makes coaching, and particularly if you coach high performance, it's a lot more difficult.
And you know the numbers.
Yep.
How tough it is in this global sport. To make it. And, I mean, if we got 100 people in this room, there'd be all sorts of opinions coming in about the pathway. What is the right way to develop players? I mean, we call it the sport for life because as long as you're vertical and you've got your health, you can play till you're 90 out on the court. And there's few that make it in the pro space. And trying to convey that to players, parents who obviously love the sport, but trying to sort of give a realistic view of the pathway, because it's tough.
It really is. And I suppose what happens is that the marketing machine, I mean, we're in Australia, and we have one of 4 countries that have a major. I just think sometimes that is just such an honour to have. Sometimes I look at the history and how lucky players my age were that we had the players like the Lavers and the Ken Rosewell. I remember warming up Ken Rosewell for matches at the Australian Open at Kooyong. We had players like Tony Roach and Neil Fraser that we could actually talk to. My friend and I, we went up to and stayed at Mel Anderson's house, and they were great mentors. And I do feel now that what's happened is the tennis has changed globally so much that the chances of making a professional tennis player, it's tough. It really is tough. And as juniors and the circuit that we have for the young juniors, particularly very early, I think the marketing and getting players in with hot shots and that, I think that TA and everybody and coaches do a fantastic job. And I think at the top end, we are very strong. And that is through the Australian Open. Anyone who is pretty much from 200 onwards, I think TA and Australia do that very well.
All right. I want to come back after the break and really get into the pro space because you're involved there. Brian, I know you've got some strong opinions about the pro space and where we're heading, the player development situation, how many tournaments in Australia, how are we developing kids here to give them the best chance of being a professional tennis player? You can weigh in on the text if you've got a view, 0433 98 11 16, all thanks to Melbourne's leading synthetic grass court surface and construction specialist. That is Asti Tennis Courts. They're trusted by Melbourne tennis clubs and councils. Check out aste.com.au.
Your home of tennis.
Welcome back. Great to have your company on this Monday night. Brett Phillips with you. We always talk the world of tennis right throughout the year, right through to the end of November when the tennis season does wrap up. Peter Dellavedova, a name that would be familiar to a lot of tennis people listening in tonight. Long-time respected coach, former player, is in the studio. Brian Hamill, a father of a young player in Zach. Brian, I should just ask you about young Zach, who had a little taste of playing up in Darwin recently. You took him over to an ITF abroad as well. He's a lefty. Just give us a little feel, and he's putting a lot of practice into his
Zach loves
tennis.
it when I talk about his tennis. He really loves it because I know nothing about it, so he's going to enjoy listening to me talk about his tennis right now. I like the way Zach plays, and he's a very good student, my son. He's a good apprentice. He turns up to work early. He works hard every day. At the moment, he's got a sore foot. So he's just had an MRI scan. I think that's hasn't come back too good. So he's probably going to have about a month off. But no, he's really finding his way. He really likes the way he's learning from Pete and the game that they're trying to work on. One thing I like about Zach is that he continues to work on his game. So it's a lot easy to fall back into bad habits and become a grinder, whereas Zach is prepared to stick at it and just do as his boss says, basically. Otherwise, Pete would sort him out.
Exactly.
He plays, Brett, he plays a little bit like, say, a bit old school, like Roche or someone like that, he's got good groundies, but he's also prepared to come in and use that slider serve and a volley. So it's a nice game to see.
It's a beautiful game when people are coming in, Pete.
Yeah.
Carlos Alcaraz, the world number one, who can bully you from the baseline, but got the crisp Federer hands when he comes in.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's the future.
Let's talk about the pro space. So, Brian, you had some great points in our sort of pre-chat about what you've experienced so far, and we've got the Australian Pro Tour going on at the moment. So we've been to Darwin, we've been to Cairns, we're in Playford this week in SA, we'll be to Sydney and then Traralgon to round out the summer. But you've also experienced taking Zach abroad. You've observed Europe, you've observed the United States, and what we're doing here, everything outside of the Australian Open. I'd love you to share some of those observations and where you think we're at.
I'm not going to probably win a lot of friends here, but Australia is like amateur hour. So over in America, the tournaments they run smoothly. There's heaps of people there. They've got sponsors, they've got music, they've got things to listen to. You go to Europe, you play tournaments, there's bars there so people can have a beer, they can have dinner. They come and watch some really good tennis. Like we were in France, and the number one French junior that won the French Open, he was playing at the same Futures event. So people come out, they see the best junior player in the world, a French junior player in the world, and it's a really good afternoon, you know.
As well.
Whereas over here, I just find there's nothing exciting about these tournaments. These players work so hard every day, and they get paid nothing. And I think something has to change, seriously, because the tournaments can be so much more. I've sent emails to Tennis Australia finding out why we can't have more of these Futures tournaments, and nobody can answer me. And if we can go to tournaments anywhere around the world where they're playing it every week, and for Australia to say we don't want to do that or we can't do that, I think that's useless. And I think something has to happen. So I'm not here to say Tennis Australia are doing a bad thing. I think Tennis Australia do a lot, but Pete's going to talk about that there's a huge gap between junior tennis and and challengers. And in that gap there, my son and a lot of other players are falling in there, and it's so hard to get out without money. And if we're playing these tournaments where they're not getting enough prize money, there's not enough tournaments, and players have to travel. Like even us, we had to travel to Darwin. And why? Why go to Darwin? Yes, the stadium was fantastic, but there's no crowds there. There's no one there. Most of the players that travel to Darwin to play are from Melbourne or Sydney. I just don't get it. It costs a fortune. It costs us like $250 a night in accommodation. We could play the same future in Ballarat, and there'll be $80 a night. Like, these players seriously have no money, yet we're making them travel all the way around Australia and all the way around the world to try and earn an ATP point. ATP points can be earned here in Australia if we had the right people run the show, and we don't have the right people.
So, Pete, this is something we've discussed on our shows, that maybe we suffer from the Australian Open syndrome, right? We've got one of the four majors. It is an incredible event. It's gone up tenfold every year, the whole precinct of Melbourne Park. But everything else to do with tennis in the pro space is very much off Broadway.
It really is. And the Australian Open is absolutely the number one best event you can possibly imagine. TA do it so well, and they even help. This is where they help our best juniors. They get the best juniors in Australia. They get to hit with the best players in the world. I know that through TA, Matthew was able to train with Novak, players of that caliber, because that's how they do the system. So TA tick that box, and they do it really well. It's as good as anywhere in the world.
No doubt.
But the problem is that if you look at the numbers, out of all the players that train, and I mean train, I mean we're talking about, between 4 hours a day, then you've got your rehab, you've got your conditioning, the whole lot. There's so many players in Australia, men and women, that train so hard, and there are less than 11 people, male and female, able to make ends meet. Now, when you look at that, I struggle with that. I look at it and I go, wow, there are so few people that actually can make any money out of this game from Australia, out of a country that has a major. And I find it difficult to understand that at this entry level, which is the biggest tour, which is the Futures Tour or the ITF event, whatever you want to call them, the old satellites, that when you're talking about between 250 in the world all the way to thousands, because we're talking about 2,600 people might be with 1 point, but then you've also got all the people that travel that haven't got points. That is an enormous circuit. And for Australians to have to travel overseas for the amount of time, particularly given how much it's changed over the years, because now you can leave Australia and you can't guarantee to get in, whereas it used to be the case. If you left Australia, you got a chance to get beaten.
Yep.
Now that's not the issue anymore, and that's why parents will have to look closely at, well, are you going to take a risk? Which is exactly the same thing that happened. Would parents take a risk and travel all the way to Darwin or Cairns without the guarantee that you're going to get in? I think the fact that we have smaller tournaments, like we've got 32 draws, but then we have small qualifying, that's no good for entry level. That really does hurt the players and the players' development, because them getting blooded into tournaments, that's how we find where the raw, the rough diamonds are. We can't just pick and say these ones are the highest ranked players in the age. We'll pick, between 15 and 23. Let's pick the top 17 boys, 17 girls, and let's put our eggs in the one basket. We'll fund them. There are a lot of rough diamonds out there. We could go through a lot of them. Pat Raft is a good example. You could go through players. We need to look at it, because the world has changed dramatically in the last couple of years. That's why I go overseas every year. You look at it and you go, wow, it's never been more difficult to make a living coming from Australia.
Yeah. So conscious of time, but if you had a blank canvas to both of you here, and Brian, you're in business, you know how business works, how would you set it up ideally? the tree, the pyramid, if you like, for kids in Australia to have any chance, or a greater pool of Australian players who have got an aspiration to be a professional tennis player, to give them a better chance to make it?
I would firstly put people in charge at Tennis Australia that have lived a tennis life. So instead of people that have gone to school and learned how to run a business, or somebody who has done a degree in something, I would want to see people in charge in Tennis Australia that have actually played this, so they can understand why these players give up and understand what the biggest struggles are. We send emails and we try and speak to people at Tennis Australia, and they just give us lame-ass excuses all the time, and it's just pathetic. So the first thing I would choose to do would probably be get rid of most of the people in Tennis Australia and put in people that actually care about the players and care about the sport. That'll be my first thing. And then I'll put Pete in charge to do the rest. Because he knows his stuff.
Yeah, well, okay, good on you, Brian.
Well, no, I
Okay.
appreciate your candidness,
No,
but there is a lot of passion, and there's,
Yep.
and Pete, happy for you to jump in here, because you and Brian obviously talk a lot and have a lot of
Well,
dialogue.
Pete talks a lot. I just listen to Pete.
Yeah, and we know that, and we know that Tennis Australia has become a massive organisation. I don't know the exact number of staff; it's somewhere around that 500, 600, maybe 700 mark. Some are just working on the Australian Open and their bigger events, and then there are the others who are at the coalface of the development and the growth of the game here. So, some people say to me, well, they're on a rock and a hard place at times, very hard to please everyone, but there's enough people that say to me, there are some clear fundamental things that are wrong that we need to fix, but they haven't been fixed.
It's not hard to fix. It's not hard to fix, is it, Pete?
No.
It's not hard to
No.
fix.
No, it's not hard to it's not hard to fix, and
we're
just,
here to try and make a solution, not just come out and go,
Yep.
this is the problems. We've worked it out, and Pete has especially. So,
I mean, just trying as quick as I possibly can. I do believe that geographically, if you look where we are, we can't compare ourselves to America that has 330 million or beyond. That they run 40 or 50 futures tournaments. They've got you don't have to leave America to be able to become a top professional. Europe, we can't compare ourselves with France, Germany, Belgium, Holland, all of them. We can't, because you just jump in a car and you can drive a couple of hours and you're in another country. We can't do that. So we have to look in Australia at making it happen. If certain countries out there that can actually run a lot of tournaments, a proper circuit, I think that we really have to look at that just for the sake of tennis players in Australia, giving what they're going through. More tennis players in Australia, we retire much earlier than the average, and because most players in Australia retire for two reasons. One, their parents run out of money, or the guilt gets them. They retire because of guilt, because they know the sacrifices that their family and their parents are putting up, and that guilt kills them. And there are so many players when I go to a tournament and I see it, and that's why I say I look at players and I go, wow, they are just hanging in there because they've got this dream, but what happens is that they know that they haven't got the money. They just haven't got the money to keep at it. Now, there is no doubt at all that we need a better system in Australia here.
No doubt.
And that system is for qualifiers.
Yep. So the first thing I do, Brett, is UTR's got to mean something more than what it is at the moment. We need to be able to have something. Now, let's just say a rough figure. If we decided that we made 10 a UTR of 10, you are guaranteed to get into pre-qualies. That means every single person who plays tennis in Australia knew that if you got to a UTR of 10, you were going to be involved in any pro event, any future that is, in Australia. So in pre-qualies. So that's like a guarantee, so that then you go, right, okay, now the UTR means something. Then we do set up. Now, okay, it might mean that we have a venue for maybe 1 or 2 more days, but the reality is that it's a clear pathway. That means that you do get a chance, and that's what's been taken away. I could take players away overseas, but if they don't have ATP points, there's a very good chance they won't get to play.
We need to slip in a break. We'll come back with more of this discussion. Thanks to Yarra Tennis Coaching. It's out at Eaglemont Tennis Club. It's just off the Eastern Freeway. Junior and adult programs available. Shane Scrutton, he's a great supporter of our show. 30 years coaching experience. yarratennis.com.au if you're a beginner. If you're a seasoned player, Shane will look after you. We'll come back and round out our chat.
Tennis.
Racing through a Monday night, I need to give a quick plug to the Victoria Tennis Cup Carnival. It's a new event for 12, 14 and 16-year-olds to be played over the Melbourne Cup weekend. So this weekend, with the John Newcomb Tennis Academy in Texas as the main sponsor, all players are playing a minimum of 4 matches, and 6 will win a week at Nukes as part of an organised trip in 2023 as a $25,000 prize pool, including the chance to win a free college placement service. Sarah Ball will be our guest on the show next week. We'll duck out and have a look at the finals, the first serve next Monday. So you can register. I think you've got up until about 11:30 tonight. The Waverley Eastern Region and North Eastern Junior Tennis Associations. Peter Dellavedova, Brian Hamill, my special guests in the studio. All right, clock's on. Pete, Brian, anything you want to get across in the last few minutes? Because I know you've come loaded with stuff tonight. A couple of things to finish off our discussion.
No, but what we're thinking about is these tournaments. We can create these futures tournaments. We can make it easier for players to get into qualifying. We'll make it a guarantee for people to get into a qualifying if the UTR is over 10. These tournaments, we want to get some backing. We want people to put their money where their mouth is. We want to have these tournaments create a bit of atmosphere. Well, I think we can make a Tier 3 tennis tournament where people can walk in there, enjoy themselves, have a sausage sizzle, have a, play on a jumping castle, have a little bit of music. We can get the local ball kids to pick up the balls for us. We can get chair umpires. I think we just need to do something for these players because I feel for them. The way they work every day and the amount of respect that gets shown here in Australia, and even across the world, like they're just used as pawns, really. Like I want these players to get the recognition they are. I watched a lot of tennis when I've been travelling this year, and the tennis is so close to like ATP tennis. It's not funny. Like I don't want to get into the specifics of it, but I know that the tennis level is crazy. Like we watched Dane Sweeney up in Darwin, then we saw Omar Jasika the next week, and well, these guys are so cool. And Dane, like he blew me away the way he moved on the court. And
I tell you, he's one player I'd love to see kick on. I mean, if you close your eyes, it's like watching Alex Demon.
I would like to know if Dane Sweeney.
Spot on.
I would like to know if Dane Sweeney has kept the stuffed crocodile he got for his Darwin win. That was his trophy, a stuffed crocodile.
Yep.
So you're talking an Australian tour.
Yep.
Underneath for
Play
those who are
every
trying to
week.
get established
It's every week,
before
so
they've
you
got to
can-
leave to go overseas, so they
I
can
think
actually build up a kitty of money without having to go too far.
You can get ATP points here. You can get a pool of money, and you can once you get ready enough ATP points, you can move to challenges over on the other side of the world. That's what we want to do. We can do it here. If we can do it, if Africa and places like that can do it, I'm pretty sure as how Australia can do it.
So that's the interesting dynamic, isn't it, Pete? How do you get the balance of all that right? Because I don't disagree with that, right? No. To give more Australians a chance to ply their trade here, to establish themselves before they take off on the global stage. But it is a sport where you need to go and test yourself on the global stage as well. So currently we've got about 19 events in Australia, which is not a lot.
We'll get a lot of international players here because it's similar like we've got to travel to, we want to try and earn an ATP point, so you're going to go to where the weaker draw is. I would consider Australia could be a weaker draw. So people on the other side of the world could come to Australia to play these tournaments. So I don't think it would be weak for that long. I think the standard of tennis would.
Yep. I think the biggest thing that we really need, if we want strength, is to be able to have a tour that, say, for example, October, November, December. You finish early before Christmas, and then you have in January, February, and March. And so, you might have a week off where you've got the Australian Open, that first week of the Australian Open, because that's when all the players tend to want to go and watch the Australian Open in particular. But I do think that there's about 6 months where we should have a really good amount of $15,000 futures, entry-level futures, that give every Australian an opportunity to being able to get a ticket, to be able to go overseas. If they're not good enough, I think that they should stay in Australia. But if they are good enough with that many chances to be able to pick up points, then they can travel. But I think that because it is a global game, you do need to travel overseas. There's no doubt. I can't see how we can get away with that. But I feel that if an Australian player can't get into tournaments in Australia and they can't get into tournaments overseas, they just will retire. They'll just stop.
I feel like we might need to do a part 2, maybe even a part 3. I'll just finish with this text from Yvonne. In fact, the first time she's ever sent a text into SEN. I've been involved in tennis administration for 40 years. TA are only interested in the success of the Australian Open. They do not care about grassroots tennis. #known fact. I mean, we hate to put everyone in the one basket of such a big organisation, but Yvonne, you're entitled to your opinion. We are here thanks to Yonex, 76 years of performance product crafted in Japan. Check out their latest range at yonex.com. I'll tell you what we'll do, Brian. You put a lot into that. We'll publish something on our website as well, across our socials. Let's keep the lines of communication open. Everyone who listens to this show is passionate about the health of Australian tennis and only wants the best, and that's why we have a platform here to be able to do that. So I appreciate both of you coming in.
Thank you, Brett.
Yeah,
you do a great job too, mate.
Brett.
We'll have to get out to Wonga Park and
Yes, mate, come on out.
up there.
We do free sausage sizzles every Saturday at the club, so come on out, Brett.
I should do
Come
a
on out
sausage.
there.
With onion on top of the sausage.
We'll do it again next Monday, 8 o'clock.